Welcome back to Admissions Mondays. My name's Ryan Kelly. I'm an editor, interview coach, and advisor at Passport Admissions. And today's topic for Admissions Mondays is the do's and don'ts of the MMI interview. I'm going to give you 10, so I want to jump right into them so I don't take up too much of your time. But having these 10 rules will be able to apply to anything you encounter during the MMI, and I'm going to give 5 do's and 5 don'ts. So let's get into the do's first. So the first do in the MMI interview is to always be searching. There's a lot of prompts where they only give you a little bit of information, and it might be tempting to be hyper focused or just exclusively centering around the information that's presented. But you need to always be searching for what might be going on outside of the parameters of the prompt. Similarly, in an acting station, if you're with an actor, you want to always be searching for more information from that actor across the table. That would mean asking them a lot of questions, giving them a lot of options to figure out how you can best help them. All right. Another do is you want to appeal to a higher authority. There are a lot of situations in the MMI that are testing whether you will exceed your boundaries or extend past your professional limits. So appealing to a higher authority is a really good idea. That could be the school principal or administrator. It could be your PI on an experiment. It could be the attending physician. And the other thing is you may be a volunteer or a medical student or something of a lower rung on the ladder or something lower in the hierarchy. So you need to be aware of who's in charge and whether you would need to bring them into the situation. Okay, a third do is to qualify your statements. So when you're leading up to taking your eventual stance in the MMI, you want to have a lot of qualifying conditional statements before you give that definitive stance. So something like, if I absolutely had to give the liver to one of these patients for a transplant and I had no transplant priority list to look at and all things were equal in their medical history, then I think I would give it to such and such patient for these reasons. So you can see, like, before you actually give the big stance, you want to qualify it a lot with several conditional statements. Okay, the fourth do in the MMI is to accommodate all perspectives. There might be a situation where you have to confront someone who is seemingly in the wrong, or maybe in the prompt, you are being positioned as the person who's in the wrong. Maybe you've gotten a lot of bad reviews online from your patients and you suddenly look like a bad doctor. You would want to not only accommodate their perspective, but what your potential perspective might be as the doctor in that situation, or not only your perspective, but what the perspective of the group member who's not cooperating might be. So accommodate all perspectives and make sure you're not just focusing on one. The fifth do in the MMI is to focus on what's unsaid. As I brought up before, the prompts will have certain information they give you on the surface, but there will be a lot of things in the prompt that are unsaid. And you need to ask questions about those things to get at what might be going on below the surface so that you can fully analyze and assess the prompt before giving your response. All right, those were the 5 do's. Let's get into the 5 don'ts. You might even argue that the don'ts of the MMI interview are more important than the do's. So I got 5 don'ts for you as well. The first don't is don't be the exception to the rule. We make exceptions for people in real life all the time, and it would be tempting to do so in an MMI prompt so that you don't sound like a really unforgiving, cold, impersonal decision maker. But it's really bad to make exceptions in the MMI because you'll come across as a doctor who's making exceptions for people or not following the rules. And that's not a good look for an aspiring physician. So don't be the exception to the rule. The next don't in the MMI is don't make any assumptions. It's really easy to proceed on assumptions in an MMI scenario. Going back to the idea of which patient you should give the liver to for a transplant, that's already operating on the assumption that there is no transplant prioritization list. It's also operating on the assumption that both patients actually want the liver. It might sound silly that you have to discuss those assumptions in this scenario, but it's key to showing the interviewer that you're aware of them. The third don't is don't do all the talking. You might be tempted to fill up all of the space in your answer, all 8 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever it has to be. But it's actually really useful to leave some time at the end in case the interviewer wants to ask you some follow-up questions or some clarifying questions. That would really help with your assessment potentially and get you more points or a higher evaluation than if you didn't give them the time to ask those. Same goes with an acting station. You don't want to be doing all the talking in the role-playing scenario with the other actor. You want to get them talking, which will make it life easier for you and give you more information to work with. So don't do all the talking. The fourth don't is don't overstep your boundaries. This is key. It might be tempting, again, as said, to do something that goes beyond your scope because you want to take action and you want to show the interviewer that you're actually doing something about the situation. But there's many cases in the MMI where not doing something might be the right move, and bringing in someone who has more clout or authority in the situation might be a lot better. So don't overstep your boundaries. Always be aware of what those are. The fifth don't is don't dance around the question. That's really key. You know, I've told you to accommodate all perspectives and look at all the assumptions and, you know, bring in all of these outside factors that might be unsaid in the prompt and to qualify all your statements. You know, all of that's really important. But then in the end, you also need to make sure you actually answer the question and give a response. So don't dance around the question. You eventually do have to take some kind of stance. Even if it's multiple conditional stances, the interviewer needs to know what you would actually do in the situation. So there you have it. I know that was a lot, but those 10 do's and don'ts that I just went through will be something you can follow no matter what gets asked. And so they're like the golden rules of the MMI, in my opinion. And I think if you study them in depth, while also practicing a lot of sample scenarios and applying these do's and don'ts, you're going to be just fine. So best of luck with your MMI, and I'll see you next Admissions Mondays.